In today's Rambam, Hilchos Pesulei Hamukdashin, Perek Yud Gimel. So the Rambam talks here about the Inyan that there's the various avodas by a korban, during which one could passel the korban through a machshava psula. The Rambam says in Halacha Dalid, Nimtzeis Lomid Sheba'arba Avodas Hazevach Nifsal b'machshava. There's 4 avodas in which Hazevach b'nifsal b'machshava, b'shchita, b'kabola, b'chas hadam, u'b'zrikosei ala mizbeach. If a person has a machshava psula during the shchita, or during the Kabbalah sadam, that is, the hilochas sadam, and the zrika ala mizbeach. These are the 4 avedas in which a korban can become possible by a machshava psula. Later in halacha tes, last halacha in the Perek, the Rambam says, Kvar b'yarnu, hilocha shalei b'regel ein hilocha. Hilocha not with b'regel, not with your feet, is not a halacha. The fichach eina machshava piselas. So if a person just is melech, he's mekabel the dam and takes with his hand and he moves his hand to throw it on the mizbeach, that's not a hilacha beregel, so machshava psula then doesn't pass. V'amahalach b'mokim she'eni tzorich harezu hilacha. V'machshava piselas bo. When you're doing hilacha, when you're going to the mizbeach, but you're going b'mokim she'eni tzorich, in a place that you don't need, so this machshava is pesach. Okay, he says a little later in the halacha, what's the din? What's the situation by mahalach b'mokim she'eni tzorich? In kibul adom bifnim v'leholach b'legabi hamizbeach elholach b'vitzi l'chutz. A person was mekabel the dam close to the place of mizbeach, and instead of going towards the mizbeach, he walked away from the mizbeach. V'choshav b'shas hiluche l'chutz b'machshavas hazman u'chayitze bo harezu peselas. While you were walking the other direction, away from the mizbeach, a person thought the machshavas hazman was to eat it, to mak tishalei bizmanei, or other machshavas psulim. So that does passel the korban. That is the halach. Again, the nekudah that's negir to us is that you could be passel a korban with a machshava psula by hilacha, is even if the hilacha is a hilacha the mokim she'eni tzorich. You're going the other direction. It's not a hilacha towards the mizbeach. That's the Rambam. But this halacha and Rambam, the other Rishonim argue. Says the Rambam, Aleph Imar Avram, Le Nohir, the Sugyon Kula Kirebelazar, the Omar Lishma Hilacha. But this is not correct because the Sugi goes according to the Belazar that holds in such a case, Halacha Shle'in Yitzrich is not called a Hilacha. What's mean the other Rambam? What is the Rambam? What is the Ravid saying? What is the Rambam saying? What's to hear the Machlekes? So the Ma'aseh is a Biktzor. It's a Mishnah Masech Zvachim that Yud Gimel Amud Aleph from the end of the first Perek of Zvachim. And first, the Mishnah says about the 4 inyonim that are passel korban. It says hazevach nifsal bar bo'advarim b'shchita kibul b'hiluch b'zrika. Then sagt the Mishnah, Reb Shimon machshir b'hiluch. Reb Shimon says that a machshava psula by hilacha is kosher. He doesn't hold that hilacha could passel a korban. Farvos shehoya eimer efshar shalei b'shchita shalei b'kabola shalei b'zrika. It's impossible to have a korban without shchita, without kabola, without zrika. Those 3 you need. You don't need hilacha for a korban. Sheikh b'tzad mizbeach v'zeirik. You shacht on the side of mizbeach and you throw it down. Zidu zrika. So you don't really need hilacha. So therefore, it's not a aveda to pass. Rabbi Eliezer Eimer or Rabbi Elazar Eimer hamahalach b'makim shu tzarich lahalich machshava piselas. B'makim she'eni tzarich lahalich ein machshava piselas. Rabbi Elazar says it depends what kind of hilacha. In other words, b'pashtus in the Mishnah, there's 3 shittas. The first shit is the Tanakama. The Tanakama says, al sadavar aposhut, that hilacha is an aveda that's pesach. It says there's chita, and there's kibul, and there's hilacha, and there's rika. So hilacha is pesach. It doesn't give any tnoim what kind of hilacha. Hilacha is an aveda that can be pesach the korban. Reb Shimon says farket, hilacha is not pesach because you don't need hilacha in a korban. You can do a whole korban without hilacha. B'chlal b'meil hilacha is not pesach. And the Belazar seems to be up some mitzvah. He says it depends what kind of a hilacha. There's a hilacha that's a hilacha hatzricha, ha'hilach b'makim shetzorich. So then the hilacha is passing. You're going makim she'en tzorich, it doesn't pass. 3 shittas. Hilacha can always be passel. Hilacha is never passel. The Tanakama and Reb Shimon, and then the Belazar, who says it depends if it's a hilacha hatzricha or not a hilacha hatzricha. That's in the Mishnah. Later in the Gemara, and after Silberberg, the end of the first Perek of Zvachim, So there's a ma'aseh mit Rav and Abai. What's called the halacha she'ino tzricha? So Rav says halacha she'ino tzricha is that, let's say you shafted the behemoth and you took the dam the other way outside, and then you're bringing it back. So that bringing it back is init tzricha because you didn't have to ever get to there. You could have just did the halacha straight from the carbon to the mizbeach. Now I went out and I'm coming back. That's the halacha she'init tzricha. This is a Rav. Now Abaye says that's not true. That's called the halacha tzricha. Lapel, you're going towards the mizbeach. What's the halacha she'init tzricha? When you're going away from the mizbeach. That's the halacha she'init tzricha. That's the sheet. That's machlekes of Rava and Abaye. And the end of the perek, and the Gemara says, Tanya, like kilo that Abaye to accept what Abaye said. That halacha she'init tzricha is when you're walking the other way to mizbeach. So this is the pshat and asog of the Rabbi. That from the fact that in the Gemara there's two shittas about what is called the halacha she'init tzricha. Halacha she'init tzricha. So that means that the Gemara is paskening like the shita of Rabbi Elazar. Again, in the Mishnah, there's three shittas. The Tana Kama said hilacha can always pass. Reb Shimon said hilacha can never pass. Rabbi Elazar said it depends if it's hilacha tzricha or hilacha she'inat tzricha. So b'meila, from the fact that in the Gemara there's two shittas about hilacha she'inat tzricha, what's called hilacha she'inat tzricha, contains that the sugya is beikir being down in the shita of Rabbi Elazar. B'meila zok the Tana Kama, zok the Rabbi that the halacha is like tesmi like Rabbi Elazar, and the halacha is that hilacha can only passel if it's hilacha hatzricha. The Rambam paskins differently. The Rambam, like the Nesikelim say, because Mishnah, the Rambam paskins like the Tanakam. The Tanakam says that hilacha always passels. Reb Shimon said it never passels. Rabbi Elazar says it depends hilacha hatzricha or ain't tzricha. And the Rambam paskins like the Tanakam that hilacha passels always, even if it's hilacha she'ain't tzricha, like the Rambam says mefurish. So that is the nukudas hamachlekes between the Ravid and the Rambam. That the Rambam passes like the Tanakama, that hilacha passes no matter what, and the Ravid passing is like Rebbe Lezer, there has to be a hilacha hatzricha, not a hilacha she'inu tzricha, like when you're going the other way away from the mizbeach. It's interesting to note that Rashi in the sugya, the Rambam is not like Rashi either, because Rashi also argues, but from a different angle. Rashi holds, and I'm not going to go into the sugya, but that even the Tanakama doesn't argue on Rebbe Elazar on that. And the Kasam Mishnah even mentions that over here. The Rashi holds that even the Tanakama holds that when you're going the other way away from the Mizbeach, that's mamash hilacha she'inat tzricha, and side the Tanakama, side the Rebbe Elazar hold that by such a hilacha, you are not, that such a hilacha can't pass the korban with a machshava psula. In other words, Rashi says, the Maskonas HaGemara, the Tanakama and Rebbe Elazar don't even argue. Kumtes that side Ravid and side Rashi for two different reasons. But side Ravid and side Rashi argue with the Rambam, and they hold that when a person does a hilacha, in other words, he shachted the korban, and then he took the dam and he went the other way away from the mizbeach, and during that halicha he has a machshavas psul. Rashi holds nobody would hold that hilacha could pass the korban. The machshava by that halacha could pass the korban. The Ravid holds, maybe the Tanakana holds that, but the halacha is not the way the halacha is like Rebbe Elazar. So Sai Rashi and said the Ravid are masking that such a halacha would not pass the korban, and yet the Rambam takes this extreme shita, and he says no, that the Tanakama holds that any halacha passes the korban even if you're going the other direction, mamish. And not just that, but that's the halacha lepeil as they learned the Rambam. That's the nukudas chidush of shitas Rambam in the scene. Now, how's the Rambam going to be taris the Ravid's kasha? Because the Mishnah says the Geshmak Avot. I don't want to go as more pshat in this week. In this union, Herzichon a gewaltiger chidush of the Rambam, and it's also a chidush in the power of hechsher mitzvah. I want to explain. We spoke even last week's year, I think it was, and we spoke before, that the Rebbe talks a lot about the union, the sugya of hechsher mitzvah, and the importance that not only a mitzvah is choshu, but even the hechsher of a mitzvah is choshu. One of the mikeres and dugmois that the Rebbe brings Mekudi Siches in a number of places for the union of hechsher mitzvah is this halacha of hilacha sadam, because the Rebbe brings the mashal I'm reading now from the Sicha Chelik Yudalet Ekev. The Rebbe brings that the Regef Shover explains that what's the reason for the shita that hilacha is an avoida that you could pass a korban. Why is hilacha considered a korban? Really, hilacha is not one of the mitzvahs of the korban. The mitzvah is shchita, the mitzvah is kabbalah, the mitzvah is zrika. Why is hilacha considered one of the inyonim? Says the Regef Shover that because hilacha is a necessary step, because it's machshir, it's a step towards the zrika, So therefore, it becomes an avoid. That was assigned to the Rebbe in Tzafnas Panei Chalatera in the beginning of Pashas Maseh. That he says he says it in a couple of places. This union says after the lashon of the Rebbe after the siba ach mikol makim ze hechrich v'nase k'moi etzem. In other words, the concept that hilacha becomes an avoda, it's even though it's a stepping stone towards something else. That is one of the dugmois, one of the main dugmois that the Rebbe brings for the chashivus of a hechsher mitzvah, that the hechsher becomes choshuv because it's machshir, it leads to the next step, which is the mitzvah itself. That's why hilacha is choshuv. Now, if the concept of hilacha is a dugmin halacha, and the Rebbe says it's the union of hechsher mitzvah. So first of all, one thing the Rebbe says, Reb Shimon in the Mishnah said that hilacha attack is not Pesach. Says the Rebbe, that's because Reb Shimon said, because really you don't need hilacha. You could shech the behemoth right near the mizbeach and do zrika. Mashenkin by a mitzvah, like let's say making a sukkah, you can't not make a sukkah. You have to make it. So the making, even Reb Shimon will be masking that the making becomes a hechsher mitzvah. That's number one. So in other words, even Reb Shimon who says that hilacha is not considered an avodah hapesach because it's not a hechsher mitzvah, because it's not necessary. But even he's made it to the concept of hechsher mitzvah when it is necessary. That's Reb Shimon. That comes out bigger chiddush of the Tanna Kamma and Rebbe Lezer. They say no, that even though hilacha is not necessary, but still being that lepoil the hilacha is a step towards the zrika, so it does become a hechsher mitzvah and it becomes an avodah. Ad kidei kach that's Pesulei the carbon. Now they're going a step further than Reb Shimon. Even Reb Shimon also holds a hechsher mitzvah, but he holds only when you must have the hechsher mitzvah. Tanna Kamma and Rebbe Lezer say even if you don't must have it, but hayes lepoil, it's a hilacha to the zrika. The hilacha becomes choshuv. Ad kidei kach that is called an avodah. And then you have the chiddush of the Tanna Kamma. L'shitas Rambam and L'shitas Rambam. That's the halacha. How far do we see the chshivas of the hechsher that it's considered choshuv, that is considered an avodah, even when it's bichlal not going towards the ma'aseh mitzvah? You're walking in the other direction. So much so did this halacha become choshuv as a davar choshuv, as an avodah chashuv at the kapasel of the garden, that even when I'm yighelach in the other direction, it's halacha she'ina tzricha mamish. Zok the Tanna Kamma later Rambam, and the halacha is later Rambam, after later Rambam, that so even so it's choshuv and it's an avodah in kipasal the so davar nifla. So if you think about it, we have here three shittas and three dargis in the chshivus of the hechsher mitzvah. The shitta of Reb Shimon in Mishnah, the way that Rebbe explains it in the orders of the Sikha, is that he holds of hechsher mitzvah, but only when it's a necessary hechsher. Yefsher b'lavochi. Mashing in hilacha, it's not a yefsher b'lavochi, so it doesn't get the chshivas of hechsher mitzvah. The shita of Rebbe Lezer and even the Tanna Kamma later Rashi, that even if it's not a necessary hechsher, nevertheless it becomes choshuv, but only calls man that it's leading to the ma'aseh mitzvah. And then you have the shita of Tanna Kamma, and which is the way the Rambam paskins, and that is that the hachshara becomes so choshuv and so independently choshuv as an avodah that even when you're going in the other direction, it's l'chura not now an act of hachshara. Still, it already became an avodah. Ad kidei kach as we pass the korban. And then come and trachten. What's the hagdora of these three in yonim? And there's a lot of machshavas, a lot of ifanim to think. Let me suggest one word. It sounds like this. Late Reb Shimon, the word of hechsher mitzvah it's a word of necessity. The Eibusher gave a mitzvah. If this mitzvah can't be done without something else, then it's included in that you have to do this. Because the Eibusher said you have to do it and you can't do it without that. So the word of hechsher mitzvah, like Reb Shimon, is based on necessity. And if there is a necessity, it's like the hechsher mitzvah. If it's not a necessity, hechsher mitzvah. And that's why it says hilacha is not a necessity. Hechsher mitzvah. So later, Reb Shimon, hechsher mitzvah is a necessity for the Eibusher geis on ton. Memuzdach boyin is boyin vert am mitzvah. Memuz nicht vert boyin nit kim mitzvah. That's the first sheet. The other, the shittas of the Tanna Kamma and Rebbe Lezer, when they say that a hechsher becomes choshev even without necessity, it must be they're saying a different word. Not only because Hashem said you have to do the mitzvah, there's a necessity. They must be saying something more, which is that that this is step A into the mitzvah. It's not a necessity, but l'payil, I'm doing a step A that leads to a mitzvah. So b'meila, it becomes connected to the mitzvah. the mitzvah, you could say, is mispashit in it. This becomes a chilik, it's a yad, it's a stepping stone towards a mitzvah without the vert of necessity. And therefore, even though it's not a necessity, this goes into the mitzvah, so mele gets chashuv. And then comes Darga Shlishi, Shitas Rambam, Das Tanakamalit Rambam. And that is that even if you're going the other direction, what does that mean? That yes, that hiloch is a stepping stone towards the mitzvah, so it becomes so independently chashuv that even when you're not using it as a direct stepping stone, finessing it already became a din of hechsher mitzvah. It's not only if it's acting as a stepping stone of the mitzvah, but rather being that hilacha is generally a stepping stone, so hilacha becomes chashuv b'fnei atzmai, even when it's not being used as a stepping stone, even when you're going in the other direction. Which yes laharich, but say a vort which is like this. There is the Rebbe, one of the nekudas that the Rebbe speaks in Sichos in a number of places, is the union of shchenus. When two things come close to each other, have a pull of one on the other. There is a sicha chelik yutes v'eschanon. The Rebbe talks about that in shchenus in halacha and a few different ifanim tziyurim, mashal din of bar metzra, and mashal din of teisvis Shabbos and teisvis Yom Tov, and el rosh el shchene, and in all of them he says that we can learn that it's more of an in chitzeni. That is that they're next to each other, so there's a chitzeni sticky kasher. Or you could say there's an in pnimi that one affects the other to change take and become like itself. And the Rebbe is ma'arich, it's a whole long sikh. But the interesting nekuda is that the Rebbe learns that Samachlekes Rashi and Rambam. Sai in Bar Metzra, the Rebbe finds a Rashi and Rambam, and Sai in El Rosh El Shcheni, Asimim Sech Sukkah. And the Rebbe says is Lashito Sai of Rashi and Rambam Bekamam Mekemis. And that is that the Rambam shows that when two things come together, one is pale and the other be'efin, that it's takim mishane the inya. It's not only of it's a chitzenis tikizach, it's mishan, and Rashi holds it's a lesser pa'ula, more of a chitzenis tikapula, in each place differently. Parmetzah and Tisha Shabbos and El Rosh El Shcheni, which sounds very interesting, very connected to what we're learning over here. The Rashi Taka learned that the hechsher mitzvah is being affected by the Ma'aseh Mitzvah, but only if Lopoyo, the Hechsher Mitzvah, is leading into the Ma'aseh Mitzvah. It's more of a chitzenis tikeh. Mashenk in the Rambam, L'shita Seitaka, like the Rebbe says, the Rambam's shita is as a two that the two inyonim that come together, be'efin of shchenis one to the other, have a pu'ula pnimis one to the other. So that we see over here in the Rambam also, that the hilacha, being that hilacha leads into a pu'ula of, it leads from the Kabbalah to the Zrika normally, so the hilacha became an aveda ad kedei kach, that even when you're not actually leading into the next thing, I'm walking the wrong direction, still this hilacha is considered a avodah and can pass all the card. So I mention one more ha'ara very quickly. And that is that in the Sikha and Chilik Yudal and Nekev, the Rebbe talks about Nosson and Birchas HaTorah. There he talks about the fact that a woman can make Birchas HaTorah because, it says Shulchan Aruch, because she has a mitzvah to learn the halachas that she has to learn. So she has to learn the halachas just to do the mitzvahs. So why is it a gather of limud HaTorah to make Birchas HaTorah? The Rebbe says no, because it's a hechsher mitzvah. So since it's in a hechsher mitzvah, based on these inyonim, this dogma, other dogma is a hechsher mitzvah, so the Torah that the woman learns in order to do mitzvahs, that becomes choshev al Torah b'fnei atzma. It becomes a davar choshev b'fnei atzma. Sagt Rabbi dort navort that Ebazei will understand that it's move on, that once a woman learns Torah and becomes choshev, shuv ein hu mugbal rak l'sha shetzricha leida hech laseis l'peil. It's not mugbal just to when she needs to learn to know what to do. Even if she knows all the halachas, nevertheless, she already has a shaykhis limud HaTorah, and the mela, even if she knows all the halachas, she can make a bracha. So the Rebbe in Ha'ara, and befrat l'das Rambam, that the Rambam holds that halacha became an aveda even b'makim she'ein tzorich. Now, since we see in the Rambam that the hechsher mitzvah becomes even when you don't need it for the mitzvah. No, is arayal derech like the woman's birchas HaTorah, that she can make a birchas HaTorah for the Torah that she's learning, which is only chashuv because she needs it to do mitzvahs, even if she doesn't now need it to do mitzvahs, because since it became a hechsher mitzvah, it becomes chashuv b'fnei atzmei. You see how the Rebbe Mamash uses this Rambam as a yisay that how deeply hechsher mitzvah becomes davar chashuv, even when it's not necessary to be used. The Rebbe says in that sikha, he says that it's move on that a woman can make the bracha even when she doesn't need it. And he says, "Nora ubefrat l'das Rambam." Especially like this Rambam that says that halacha is choshuv and kapasel, even if it's halacha shenitz richa. Why is it befrat l'das Rambam? L'chura it's dafka l'das Rambam. L'das Rashi, l'das Rabbi, verkehrt. If the halacha is not leading towards the carbon, towards the zrika, so it's taken not a chshivas of hechsher mitzvah. It's taken not an avodah. So why is that word to the Rebbe dorten ubefrat l'das Rambam? Das darf man ein sein dorten in dem Sicha, the ten lechocham v'yechkam.